I think we'll wait till a minute or two after 11 o'clock and then we'll start. So let's see, we're up to 50. Wow. So I was curious as to what the draw is. We don't do a feedback afterwards, but whether gardeners were drawn because, or whether people like forests and going through the woods, or whether the weather plays a role.
I don't understand this.
What do you think?
They're stuck at home and they don't want to have nothing else to do.
So anyway, it's so Don Anderson's on. He's going to do March, I think, and talk about algae.
Yeah. Ms. Aronson? This is Gerald Clark from the Board of Health in Town of Dover. In response to your point about visiting forests, as you may know, Dover is approximately 40%, 45% forested. And we have been inundated with people to the point that the police have had to take action on traffic on streets as people are making use of access to the woods.
Because
Not
of
getting
COVID.
sound.
Good morning, Julie's husband. Yeah. Oh, okay. So, let me just. Turn off my email and get back to my full screen view. Okay, so it's I think a good time to start. So good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Karen Aronson, president of the class of 1970. One piece of Zoom housekeeping. Please mute yourselves so we don't have distracting noises. We will be recording this session and posting it. We just recently received the link for our last session on tornadoes, and the video is on the Cardinal and Gray website. I think it will also be on the class of 1970 website. I think it will be posted in the chat column. We're thrilled to have you join us for the 5th class of 70 environment talk. They've been on widely different topics and all of them have been fascinating. We plan to skip December, but offer one in January related to the wildfires and air quality in California by Earl Withicombe, who is a lead technical advisor for the California Air Resources Board. So that should be fascinating too. Today we have Rod Walker. He was a course 6 major and has master's degrees in both 6 and 15, which is computer science, electrical engineering, and management. He'll talk about invasive species, sometimes known as weeds, and how they've been making their way into our eastern forests and wreaking havoc with our environment and our ecosystems. He and his wife, Maggie, live in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and they were in Virginia, and they were co-founders of Blue Ridge PRISM, a nonprofit dedicated to fighting this problem. Rod will talk for about 20 or 25 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions and comments. If you have a question or comment, please indicate that in the chat function, and we will try to go in the order that people sign up. Although we will try to let people who haven't spoken speak before others get a second chance. If you have an urgent question that deals with something that's being talked about right away, maybe try to wave your hands or break in, unmute yourself. But with so many people, more than 112 people have registered. We're up to 61 participants, and my guess is we'll get higher. So again, please make sure, as Rod talks in particular, that your settings are on mute. And let me turn the floor over to Rod. Thanks, Rod.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Nancy, and everybody who's been organizing this great series of talks. So it's been fascinating. I look forward to the others. So I'm going to talk, as Karen indicated, I'm going to talk today about invasive species, and particularly invasive plants. Now all I need to do is make sure I can get these slides to progress. There we go. So I'll talk, so the order of the presentation today is just a little bit on my background. And then I'm going to talk about what's the problem, what needs to be done, talk a little bit about what we're doing with the Blue Ridge PRISM. And PRISM stands for Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. And then we'll take it down to questions. So, and just a quick background, yeah, the double E in finance, 40 years in IT consulting with a focus on big data. Forestry has been a hobby of mine. I bought my first 180 acres when I was 2 years out of MIT. Maggie and I live on 1,500 acres in western Albemarle County, Virginia. And our neighbor is the Shenandoah National Park. And we started dealing with this issue of invasive plants when we found that we actually had 20 acres that you literally couldn't walk into, you couldn't even see into it because it was an impenetrable mass of Oriental Bittersweet. And then we realized we had some other 5-acre patches, and we had maybe 50 or 100 other outbreaks on the property. And to go deal with that original 20 acres, it was so bad that we had to start with bulldozers. We literally had to run bulldozers through the middle of it so we could get inside the 20 acres and get to the vines that we had to deal with. So that was my introduction, if you will, to this problem. So I'll talk a little bit more about what is the problem. I mean, the fear based on the experience that we've seen, and lots of other landowners in this part of the world are seeing, is if you look out for the long term, let's say for the sake of discussion, 100 years, that large swaths of the eastern forests are going to disappear. And I'll talk about how that happens. And I don't, it's really not to me the fear. The answer is it's going to happen. It's just a question of how much, how quickly, and that's hard to answer. And this is a subject where the problem, it's not caused by climate change. But the climate change certainly exacerbates the problem, and in some cases accelerates the problem. But similar to climate change, this is a problem that's kind of creeping up on us to the point where most people don't even know it's happening. Most people just look at the landscape and say, look at all that great greenery. Yeah, hey, green is good. Hey, no problem. So what is the problem? So ultimately the problem here that we're going to talk about today is native plants that are in effect being replaced by overseas invaders. And most of these were brought here on purpose with good motives, whether it was erosion control or ornamental purposes, but nobody really looked ahead to what are the risks of bringing in these plants. And in fact, most non-native plants are not invasive. And generally speaking, not an invasive plant problem, but a small number of them are really serious problems. In the state of Virginia, the Department of Conservation and Recreation has published a list of invasive plants in Virginia, there are 90 plants on the list. And there are some new ones that have arrived since then that probably should be on the list. So why are they invasive? They're invasive because here, as opposed to where they came from, we don't have any bugs that eat them. We don't have any fungi that infect them. Our deer and other animals don't graze on them. The caterpillars don't munch on them. In other words, none of the native fauna really attack these plants and keep them in control, as opposed to where they came from. Whether most of them are Oriental, but not all. In their native homeland, yes, there are all kinds of things that co-evolved with them and eat these plants and actually keep them in check. So these plants don't run amok where they came from. But here, there's nothing to keep them under control. And to make it even trickier, in the springtime, you can see what are the first plants that leaf out? Well, it's some of these. What are the last ones right now that we're watching here in Virginia that still have leaves on them? Sure enough, some of them stay green late in the season. They adapt to lots of different soils. Some of them are incredibly prolific seeders, and they have other advantages. I mean, one of the things that we talk about sometimes is, what about deer? I mean, why don't the deer browse them? Well, in fact, what happens is the deer are biasing the outcome because the deer graze on the native plants and they don't graze on these non-native plants. So they're suppressing the native plants and opening the door for the non-natives to so ultimately the question is, hey, why is this a problem? Well, ultimately it's a problem because nothing stops them. Well, pause, think about that. Nothing stops them. That means they just keep going. And they create monocultures that tend to overwhelm all the native plants in their path. Some spread really, really fast. And like with our 20 acres, they can render large areas impenetrable and unusable. Those who are trying to manage them are finding that the costs of doing so are soaring. They're just it's going up. And if all of that weren't bad enough, because the native fauna doesn't feed on these things, what that means is that in the local food web, these plants are largely sterile. Not 100%, but compared to the natives, they're largely sterile, which means they don't support our native insects, birds, and mammals. Which also means that as these plants spread and multiply, we are actually going to have, and in some cases already do have, fewer insects, fewer birds, fewer mammals, etc. So it's not just a plant issue; it directly impacts the wildlife that lives here. So a couple of caveats before I go into the rest of this. One is today we're going to really talk about invasive plants and the impacts on our forests. Whereas we have equally severe issues, not just from invasive plants, but there are invasive fungi, invasive insects, invasive fish, invasive mammals, that are non-native, and in some cases wipe out entire species. I mean, just with trees, I mean, most of the eastern hemlocks have disappeared. The butternuts have largely disappeared. The chestnuts have gone. The elms are largely gone. The ashes are now currently on their way out. And walnuts and oaks are being challenged. And there's other bugs here that will eat pretty much any one of the trees. So that's a bigger issue. Of course, it's not just the forests that are at issue. It's pretty much all the ecosystems, encounter the same kind of problem. So this is a big challenge. So here's some examples. A lot of people have heard of kudzu. So here's kudzu. And the further south you go, the worse it gets. You can see the school bus. What's not so obvious, of course, is the building back here, buried underneath it. So and once the kudzu overwhelms, nothing grows underneath it. I mean, it's a monoculture. Oriental bittersweet is less familiar to most people. Here you can see it growing up into these trees, and this is the problem we've had on our property, which is this bittersweet is fully capable of taking down any tree. The vines, and you can't tell in this picture, but some of these vines get up to 4 to 6 inches in diameter. And when you've got maybe 5, 8, or 10 of those growing in a tree, they go up, they put their leaves out at the top, They grab the sunlight, so the tree doesn't get as much sunlight to its leaves. The weight is huge with all these really heavy vines, because it's hard wood in these vines. And then, of course, if the tree is weakened, there's lots of weight, a storm comes along, and down goes the tree. And then that opens up the canopy and lets more sunlight get to the forest floor, and actually that accelerates the whole process. So that's Oriental bittersweet. So here on the left, you see bamboo, really common around this part of the world, growing along roadsides, etc. We've got Japanese honeysuckle, on the lower right. If you've got a fence row in Virginia, good chance you've got Japanese honeysuckle growing on it. Here's English ivy. People plant it all the time, and if you have it in your lot downtown as a ground cover, it's not such a big deal. But when it gets loose and traverses into the wild, it becomes aggressive, like a lot of these other vines. So here's another one most people haven't heard of: Fiveleaf Akebia, a chocolate vine. It grows up the trees and again smothers them and again creates a green mound. Here's Porcelainberry, another vine that grows around here. It's very similar to a native grapevine, but it grows right up to the tops of the trees and weights them down and brings them down eventually. So it's not just vines. The vines are arguably the worst of it from some perspectives, at least when you're talking about the forest and the forest canopy. This is one of the other leaders in the Blue Ridge PRISM, William Hammerstein. He collected all the seeds off of a lanthus tree, also known as a paradise tree or tree of heaven. This is a small to medium-sized tree. There's 43,000 seeds in that bucket. So they spread pretty easily. So this is the Bradford pear. I mean, some of you probably planted Bradford pear. I know we did in one of our previous houses until we got a little smarter about it. So Bradford pear is a classic example of the nursery trade brought in the Bradford pear, and it's self-sterile. Hey, what a great thing. You don't have to worry about it becoming a problem. So they literally sold millions and millions of Bradford pears, and they still are, around the country. And then they discovered that the tree, when it gets big, gets brittle and can be broken off in a storm, and had other characteristics that people didn't particularly care for. And so they decided to introduce other cultivars of the calorie pear. Well, guess what? When you bring in the other cultivars of the calorie pear, all of a sudden the Bradford pear now is not sterile anymore. It breeds. And so all these millions of trees that have been planted all over the country are now breeding and spreading into the wild. So here's a field along an interstate that's in the springtime. This is what it looks like. It's just completely filled in with Bradford pear, and it just keeps spreading. This field, all the small stuff here. This is the field that was cut 7 months before this picture was taken. And all these short things growing in here are autumn olive seedlings. And they will fill this field if nobody does anything about it. And what you'll have, this is a shrub, and it'll grow up to 8 to 12 feet tall, and it will be absolutely dense. It will be a monoculture. There will be literally nothing else growing in this field other than autumn olive, period, the end. And so it's a challenge. So here you have garlic mustard, grows on the forest floor. It fills in the forest floor and creates its own monoculture. It bolts in the springtime. You can see the little white flowers on the tops of the stems, and it creates seed pods all up and down. Each one of these plants can generate thousands of seeds. So it just fills in and spreads. Here's another one, Japanese Stiltgrass. This would probably be a forest that didn't have anything on it, just dried leaves and things. And the Stiltgrass is just moving through the forest, filling it in, and the Stiltgrass can grow anywhere from 2 to 4 feet tall, and just smothers anything. All the native wildflowers, even tree seedlings, struggle to come up through the Japanese Stiltgrass. So here's an interesting chart from the U.S. Forest Service. Every 5 to 7 years, they inventory plants in like quarter-acre plots in all the forested areas of the United States. There's something like 64,000 plots, I think it is, something like that, that they inventory every 5 to 7 years. And one of the things they've started doing in more recent years is to identify which of these plots have invasive plants growing in them. And so this, you can see the color-coded legend down at the bottom with the percent of the subplots that have been invaded. And you know, when you get up to the red, it means pretty much every plot that they track has been invaded with invasive plants. And as you can see, most of it's in the eastern United States, and in particular in the mountain areas going up and down. So yeah, we in Virginia here have plenty of it. So what this represents is challenges at all levels. We've got invasive trees that are replacing native trees. We've got the invasive vines that tear down the canopy and eliminate the forest and create green mounds. We've got the shrubs that fill in the fields. And oh, by the way, they also fill in the forest understory, some of them. And then we got the grasses and forbs that just smother everything at the ground level, and including slowing or preventing the regeneration of trees. And not to be totally ignored, this is not just a question of plants growing on terrestrially. This is an aquatics issue as well. So there's some number of aquatic invasive plants that literally will fill in the entire water body in the pond, fill in the streams, and impact the fish and the other aquatic wildlife, creates actually real danger for boaters and water skiers, and actually can significantly reduce recreational opportunities in some bodies of water. So where does all this lead? So this is of course is one of the key questions. Yeah, if we do nothing more than we're doing today, these plants are just going to continue to move, because remember, nothing stops them. So they just keep going, and they will continue to overwhelm and eliminate the forest and the meadows as we know them. And wildlife populations will continue to decline. And there's becoming a little, slowly but surely, more and more studies and literature are coming out to talk about this. And so, if nothing stops them, I mean, there's the foresters of the world, refer to forest succession, because a forest moves through various stages with various different species. And ultimately you get a mature forest. It might be an oak hickory forest. But the question is, what is a mature forest? What is the end of forest succession? The fear, of course, is the end of forest succession is green mounds. It's no longer a mature forest. And so the point here is that, at the rate we're going, large swaths of the eastern forest will ultimately become green mounds. Some people call them vine barrens. Whatever you want to call it. The eastern forests are seriously being threatened. And it's not just the forest, it's other ecologies as well. So what needs to be done? The PRISM gets into a lot of these things. The first one is stop the bleeding. People continue to import and bring in new invasive species. And in fact, a lot of the invasive species that are listed on the Virginia list of 90 invasive plants, at least half of them are still in the nursery trade and being sold. I mean, it's awful. We want to also stop the sale and transport of those that are already here. We've had people taking the beautiful berries that come on the Oriental Bittersweet and make wreaths out of them for holiday decorations. And then if the people buy them, they use them, and later they throw them out in the woods behind them. Well, what they did is they just planted Oriental Bittersweet in their woods. So now there's a lot of opportunities here for improved science. First of all, we need data. We need real data. So I'm working to try and get 2 studies funded in Virginia. One being, what are the actual costs actually being incurred today already in Virginia? It's not millions of dollars. It's at least tens of millions of dollars, and could easily be over $100 million a year being incurred in Virginia by landowners, parks and recreation organizations, the state, and others attempting to deal with this problem. But nobody's really added it all up. And if people really understood how much is being spent on this already, it might help us get some action to happen. Another study I would like to have happen is having Virginia Tech or UVA do a study of what happens to the Blue Ridge forests in 100 years if we do nothing more than we're doing today, and actually do a projection of the spread of some of these plants and what's the impact on the forests. So we'll see. There's also an opportunity for science to come up with advanced treatment methods, drone-based solutions to go out there and actually detect specific species of plants and then actually treat them, as opposed to having people having to bushwhack in to find the plants at issue. And there's huge amounts of work going into biocontrols, which is a very scary subject, but it's arguably the best long-term answer, assuming it works right. So biocontrols means you go back to the country where these plants came from originally, and you investigate the fungi and the insects and things that keep it in check over there, and you try and find things that will keep the plant in check and not bother any of our native plants. Really, really difficult science, but there's a lot of it going on. There's a bug that they brought over for garlic mustard that's been in labs for the last 30 years. Because every time they try and get federal approval to release it, they want more tests done. It's really difficult work. But there are a few being released, but it's still not clear whether even the few that have been released are really making a difference. So stay tuned. Other things that are part of the puzzle here are educating landowners in terms of both what they have as well as what they should not be planting. Policymakers, state government, federal government, many of them are just not even aware of the problem, not to mention what it takes to deal with it. Funding, no surprise, funding is a big issue. A lot of landowners can't afford to deal with taking out these plants, as well as funding new solutions of different kinds. Public awareness is a big issue, so people just stop buying some of these plants and planting them in their backyard and then letting them escape into the wild. Likewise, what you have is you got 50 states, working on how do you solve this problem, and they're all reinventing the wheel, as opposed to there being a set of federal guidelines that each state could adopt with modifications that fit the state. But the feds have not gotten out in front of this issue, so there's just a lot to be done here, and we in the PRISM work on a lot of this. So what is the Blue Ridge PRISM doing? We have two primary core activities. One is we focus on our home geography, where we go and try to educate, inspire, and help the landowners in our 10-county area to undertake the removal and replacement of invasive plants. In the last year and a half, we've also stepped up and started doing various activities, particularly in Richmond with the key state agencies, to try and impact this problem across the entire state. And I'll talk about each of these really briefly. This is just a quick list of some of the people who are involved with the PRISM. The people on the left are the ones who are most involved and have really been actively helping the PRISM over time. And the people on the right are other agencies and organizations that have partnered with us just from time to time, as opposed to on an ongoing more continuous basis. Here's the 10 counties that we cover. Augusta and Nelson to the south. On up the blue. This is the Blue Ridge going up through here, up to Clark County, up to the West Virginia border. The Shenandoah National Park is entirely encapsulated inside this area. And we've estimated that in these 10 counties, we've got roughly 50,000 landowners who have 5 acres or more. And they constitute not our sole audience, but our primary audience. And what do we do for them? We have quarterly meetings with speakers, which are now being done by Zoom instead of in person. We used to table and hand out literature, lots of events. Most of those have been canceled. We do give speaking engagements. Today counts as one. I probably do 1 or 2 a month at this point. It was really quiet earlier in the year, but as the different groups have reconvened by Zoom, they're still looking for monthly speakers to come to their organizations and speak. We do workshops for landowners, typically 9 or more per year. These workshops teach people how to identify the plants on a plant by plant basis. And then we also go through all the different techniques for controlling them. And whether that's manual techniques, whether that's using herbicides or combinations of things, we show people how to do this in the most cost-effective, environmentally friendly ways to get it done. We used to do field walks as well, take people out, show them the plants in the wild. We've held off doing that for now, although we're looking at ways to reinstitute that without violating social distancing. And we allow people to send us photos of plants. A lot of people have a plant, they don't know what it is. They sell us photos and we have a discussion and we help them understand what it is. We publish quarterly newsletters. We've got all kinds of ID information and other useful information on our website. And we've managed to raise over $1 million in the last 6 years, all of which has gone to landowners, and none of it goes to the PRISM to help pay for invasive plant removals. So the landowner financing, we got $640,000 from the Natural Resources Conservation Service that went out to help 94 landowners treat 2,000 acres. We're in the year 4 of a 5-year program there. We've also got a 5-year grant from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to help treat wavy leaf grass at 6 sites, 5 of them in the national park. And then we've also got a U.S. Forest Service grant through the Virginia Department of Forestry for 3 years of work on wavy leaf. And we're now up to about 2,000 people on our mailing list. We started the year at 1,300, and it's actually been a big year. We're moving along aggressively. On a statewide level, a lot of the statewide things kind of quiesced at the beginning of the year because we have a biennial legislative session that kicked in January, February, and March. And then, of course, the pandemic showed up and everybody had changed their priorities. But we are dealing with the 2 secretariats, both of which report directly to the governor, Secretary of Natural Resources and the Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry. These other acronyms are the Virginia Department of Transportation, Department of Wildlife Resources, Department of Conservation and Recreation, Department of Forestry, and the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So we deal with all of them on an ongoing basis. And we've also met with the First Lady here, who's an avid environmentalist. One of the things we do is we have a Virginia noxious weeds list. So if a plant goes on this list, it can't be imported into the state, it can't be sold, and it can't even be transported around the state without a permit. There's only like 12 plants on this list, and we just got 6 more added in July, and we're working on the next round. Once we get a plant nominated to be on the list, it takes roughly 2 years to get it through the approval process to actually get it on the list. But we're working on it. So this drone project is a fun one, so we're using drones. Well, actually, I went out and got a grant for UVA, a $75,000 grant for UVA to fund a PhD student. And she's proving that we can use a drone with hyperspectral cameras to fly over a landscape, capture very small pixels, capture like 700 different wavelengths of light in each pixel, and then analyze the pixels for the spectral signature of specific plants. So the idea being to produce a map of a specific plant across a wide area. This would be really, really helpful for a lot of the things that we do. And that's well along, and the preliminary results look promising. So the last item on here is, we cover 10 counties. We'd love to have other PRISMs in the state of Virginia, covering other counties. And there's several people who are contemplating doing this, and we would help them do that. So one last pitch here, just in case anybody's so inclined. We're 100% funded by just grants and donations. We've got 2 organizations that give us $20,000 grants, one from the Virginia Environmental Endowment, another from the Family Foundation, each of which we have to match, with donations from other people. So we're out there on the hunt, and that process is, our annual process is starting right now. We just sent out our first round of fundraising campaign letters. So in effect, we get a 1-for-1 match for any of the donations we get in here. If anybody's interested, you can go to blueridgeprism.org and hit the donate button. And I'm also actively working on setting up an endowment, for this problem for the state of Virginia as a longer-term funding solution, and as well as one that will deal on a wider basis than just the Blue Ridge Prism. So that's all underway. So that's the quick and dirty. Those are the slides I've got here. So Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell me if we have any questions to deal with.
Thanks. I'm unmuted now. Thanks, Rod. That was fascinating, and I learned a lot. And I apologize to all the people who are on the call. It's a really interesting group. And Rod, if you get a chance to look through, they represent all kinds of different people who love forests and come from different areas of the country. I think you'll hear from some of them now. Let me lead off with 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll get to some of the others. Can you imagine a role for young people, AmeriCorps type people, or people who are out of work and that we're looking to reemploy? I mean, you talked about bulldozing sections, but I just wonder if there's a way to create jobs here and accomplish what you're trying to accomplish going forward in this era.
Yeah, good question. Interesting you should mention AmeriCorps, because actually for one of the grants, we actually use an AmeriCorps team to do some spraying of wavy leaf grass over in a public park in Elkton, Virginia. The other observation I would make is there are several consulting forestry firms across the state of Virginia who do this class of work for hire. So if you want to get rid of the Oriental Bittersweet on your property, you can hire them to come in and do this. These firms are, I would say, probably swamped with business, and certainly they're growing. Their business is growing rapidly, because as more and more landowners become aware of what the problems are, more and more people are realizing they need help to do this. And so becoming somewhat trained in how to do this, which is not hard, but it is physically demanding. It's really hard work. You spend your days out in the forest, either cutting or spraying or treating in various ways. So there are lots of job opportunities to be had around this. If you're in the right place and get connected with the right people. On our website, we have a list of contractors that deal in this stuff. So if anybody's in Virginia, looking to get into this business or hire into one of these firms, you can just take that list and start calling.
Thanks. Let me ask one other. Could the 2-year approval process that you have for the noxious weeds list be shortened?
Yeah.
Do you think it should be, and what would it take to do it?
Well, okay. So the answer is it probably can't be shortened, at least not in Virginia, not easily, unless one takes a radically different approach, which I would be happy to do. But a few words about the history of this is appropriate to illustrate the challenge. Because up until about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, the law in Virginia said no plant can be a noxious weed if it's widely disseminated. Think about that. So things like Oriental Bittersweet, Autumn Olive, they were already widely disseminated. So they couldn't be put on the list. And this language was put into the law when the law was created in 1970. And it was put in there by the nursery and landscape trade, because they didn't want to be cut off from selling plants that are already out there. And so anytime you go to try and change the law, there are vested interests that are fighting you every step of the way. And so we got the law changed. We got the widely disseminated words taken out of the law. But the price we paid for doing that was we had to come to a compromise with the nursery trade in Virginia to say that anything that's already in the nursery trade being grown in Virginia, can't be put on the noxious weeds list. So this opened up things like Oriental Bittersweet and Ailanthus to be put on the noxious weeds list. But if we go back after the other half of the list that we'd like to put out there, we can't do it with the law the way it is. And so everybody's very careful, very cautious about doing this. There's a long process to get it put through. It has to be put out for public comment about 3 different times. It has to go through the State Office of Management and Budget to be reviewed by them. It's got to be reviewed by the governor's office. And that's assuming it gets past the agriculture board that runs the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So I sit on the committee that reviews the recommendations and makes these recommendations. Myself and other people from the PRISM actually make about at least half the recommendations. But there's 17 different organizations represented on the committee that has, and you need a majority vote before the plant will even make it out of committee and go to the board for discussion. So, what I'd love to do is get the law changed again to allow us to say any plant that's already on the noxious weed list in a neighboring state, gets expedited treatment and hopefully automatically goes on our list. But boy, that's I don't hold out a lot of hope to get that to happen. But there's a group of people separate from the PRISM that we do consult with, who are working on the next legislative approach to dealing with this issue. So, but that takes years in itself. So stay tuned.
They ought to listen to your talk. Thank you. Let's turn to Alan Post. Unmute yourself. I think you have a question.
Yes, yes. Good morning. I found this talk very interesting and not surprising. I live in a condo in eastern Massachusetts with conservation land behind me, but I noticed that there's this creeping vine, that likes to insinuate itself among the various other plants. Is this necessarily an invasive species? I guess it is. And if so, how do I identify specifically what other invasive species are in this conservation land?
Yeah, okay, so a couple of suggestions. First of all, the answer to your first question is it's not necessarily an invasive plant. There are native vines. Notable amongst them are Virginia creeper, poison ivy, which is actually ecologically a great native plant, and greenbrier and several others that are, they're good native plants and fit in the ecology very well. But then, as you noted in my slides, there's lots of non-native vines. If you're in a position where you want to email me photos of the vines, both bark, flowers, leaves, whatever you've got available, I may be able to tell you what it is, I may not. Another opportunity is to find your local cooperative extension office. Frequently, they have a group, in some states, they've got a group called Master Gardeners or other people there who can help you identify specific plants. So you should be able to get help through them. Another option is to find in your State Department of Forestry. Frequently, they have area foresters whose job is to work with landowners on forest-related topics, and usually, but not always, they're knowledgeable about not just the trees, but the other thing go around the trees and impact trees. And then, of course, there are paid consulting foresters who should be knowledgeable about this as well. And then there's also the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Sometimes you find people there who are also very knowledgeable on the subject and who are willing to come out and walk your property and tell you what's there.
Thanks. Katrina Kellner, I'm not clear on whether you want to ask a question or whether you were just identifying yourself. If you want to ask a question, unmute yourself.
I do want to ask a question. Can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead.
Yes. So I'm on a board that is responsible for about 50 acres of land that's owned in common by our neighborhood. I was wondering what kind of tips you could give us about seeking grant money to help us with our invasive species problem, because as you've mentioned, it's extremely labor intensive and expensive and a little bit beyond our budget.
Yeah. So every state is different to some degree. There are some federal programs. And so there's a couple of places to go look for starters. You know, one would be to go to, again, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Yeah, find your local office that covers your area and find your district conservationist, your DC, in that office. And ask them about the different programs that are available. One of the programs that's available that's sometimes used for this purpose is known as EQIP, which is EQIP, which stands for the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. It's tricky sometimes to get money out of that, but and again, it probably varies a great deal from state to state how they administer that program. But you know, we have used it for that purpose. Yeah, here in Virginia. Again, not easy, but it can be done. Another place to check would be the State Department of Forestry. Sometimes they have grant monies available to help people do various different things. We've gotten grants for PRISM purposes, or from landowners here have gotten grants. Yeah, from the Department of Forestry sometimes to do that. And then, a much longer reach, would be going to, if you can find foundations, private foundations that are focused on environmental causes. And there are some of those out there as well. So, there are options, and none of them are easy. But some of them do supply some funds.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Lou Metzger, unmute yourself.
But I don't think that we should.
I was just wondering, given the poor performance that we seem to have had over the past in terms of controlling invasive species, what kind of optimism is possible? I mean, are we going to ever have a good outcome here?
Yeah, so we've certainly had our share of landowners who asked us, is this hopeless? And the answer is, when you're dealing at an individual landowner level, it's not hopeless, depending upon what your objectives are. So, for example, on our property, as I mentioned, I live on 1,500 acres, which is a pretty heady undertaking. We can't possibly do everything we want to do with invasives on our 1,500 acres, so we have to set priorities. And our number one priority for us, and this is my decision, is to preserve the forest canopy. Because if the canopy comes down, first of all, it changes everything that's growing underneath it. And number two, it takes a long time to replace the forest canopy. And whereas if you lose things at the shrub or the ground level layer, those will come back a lot quicker. So my first priority here is actually my two top priorities. One is to preserve the forest canopy, And the second one is to stop any plant, attempt to eradicate any one of these plants where I only have a small amount of it. You know, we've had new ones show up on the property from time to time, and we just jump all over them and try and get them out. And we're doing fairly well with some of those. We've got some that are not very common that we hope to be able to get out, but it's a longer term effort. And then there's other things which, like Japanese stiltgrass, which are so overwhelming and so prolific that, you know, I mean, we don't even try. It's just a lower priority. I got to deal with other things first. So one of the things we tell people is to first do an inventory and understand what you have. Get the data, if you will. You know, what are the 10, 20, whatever plants that are at issue on the property that you're dealing with. And then you can start setting priorities about what's important and what isn't, what's doable and what isn't. You know, we actually had 14 species mapped by hand across our 1,500 acres. And that just opened up all kinds of interesting possibilities, because you can see that Oriental bittersweet is really intense over in these areas, and there's very little on the east side of the property. That allows you to have strategies. So we want to make sure it doesn't really get established on the east side of the property, you know, while at the same time we're going after some of the hot spots on the west side. So yeah, understanding what you have and then creating a plan and a strategy is just like anything else you do in life, is really important. And is it hopeless? No, it's not hopeless, because when we started dealing with bittersweet, we literally had stuff 6 inches in diameter up to that, you know, growing up into the trees. We don't find that anymore. You know, we occasionally find an inch that we've overlooked, but we have thousands of pencil thickness things. So we're just trying to stop it now from getting reestablished with big stuff. And so I believe we've done a pretty good job of stopping the threat to the forest canopy, but it's eternal, you know, perpetual maintenance to keep it at bay.
Thank you. Greg Aronson, unmute yourself.
Hi, my question is, what is the federal involvement in this? You're doing an excellent job at the state level in Virginia, but is there any help, or is there any even authority at the federal level, and particularly through the Environmental Protection Agency, since I saw some reference to the wildlife, the Forest Service on your list?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is there's some help to be had at the federal level, as a lot of the grant programs we go after, of course, are federal grants, either coming through the Forest Service or other through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So there's some funding opportunities, but in terms of taking real proactive action, the answer is not nearly enough. So yeah, I mean, they do a decent job of screening stuff coming into the country, but not enough. They are doing most of the research on biocontrols, and that's just, as I mentioned, really, really difficult. But you know, some things are happening there. But in terms of what does the federal government do that helps a particular landowner, pretty much nothing. In fact, of course, the federal government is a huge landowner too. So you know, Shenandoah National Park, they spend roughly, it's got to be somewhere between $1 million and $1.5 million a year on this subject within the 200,000 acre Shenandoah National Park. And that's enough money to allow them to focus on environmentally sensitive ecosystems and places that people frequent and need access to, but it doesn't come close to allowing them to really deal with the whole park. Same thing with the National Forest.
Thanks. Reed Ash, unmute yourself, please. Reed, you still there?
I thought I could do it with the space bar, but apparently that's not working.
the question's been partly answered, but I'll ask if you'd like to address it completely. Have there been any success stories in the effort to get rid of invasive plants?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different categories of answers to that. Is, I mean, I consider what we're doing on our property with saving the forest canopy to be a success story. But the key is, of course, what's the definition of success? So to me, the definition of success as a practical matter is either eradicating new arrivals or things there's very small numbers of. Eradication for the common plants is just not an option. So their success means keeping them at bay enough that they're not causing major problems. So it's tricky. We in this business, we have a program called EDRR, Early Detection and Rapid Response. So with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, when they're on point for this. So if we detect black swallowwort, growing on the University of Virginia campus, and that's not supposed to be in the state at all, we call the folks at DCR and say, hey, look, this black swallowwort's shown up here. And then they get on the case with UVA to get permission to go deal with it and make sure that it gets taken out. So having a rapid response capability within the state is really helpful. But unfortunately, we also notice some other relatively uncommon plants that are spreading down, some of the riverways. And with a small, if somebody had $5,000 or $10,000, we could probably stop that infestation and stop it from spreading across hundreds of square miles. And it's only around half a square mile today. But the funding to do that generally doesn't exist. And so it's very frustrating for us because we in the course of the year, we may have 5 or 10 different opportunities to make a big difference with a modest amount of money to stop something important. Usually we can't, which is why I'm trying to set up a longer term endowment funded operation to allow specific things like that to be targeted and taken care of.
Thanks. Phil Nelson, unmute yourself. Everybody else who's talked should remute.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. This is a really good talk. I live above Denver, and I work on a number of noxious weeds on our properties, communal properties here. One that's taken off, and especially in the last few years, is cheatgrass, which is the scourge of the Basin and Range province of the Western U.S. and occurs on a lot of public land. And we now see it at high elevations, and we attribute that to the fact that it's gotten warmer, that our climate is warming. We have warmer temperatures in both the spring and fall. So my question to you is, do you have any specific examples in the Blue Ridge country where you're pretty sure that the spread of a particular invasive species is really attributable to the changing climate? You've mentioned it in your beginning of your talk as a general factor, but I wonder if you have any specific examples.
Yeah, so, and of course, it's hard to say for sure exactly what's happening. But for example, if you take kudzu, which is, the vine that ate the South, I personally, my suspicion is if you really tracked it, you would find that it's slowly moving north. And as the climate warms, I think you're going to see more of that. We've got other things in the South like Kogan grass. It's probably as bad or worse than the cheatgrass you're dealing with. I expect to see that moving north. So in the further north you go in the United States and into Canada, you don't have zero invasive plants, but you tend to have fewer of them. And so I think what's going to happen is as the climate warms, more and more of these are going to migrate up into the northern parts of the country. And it's just going to get worse.
Is there anything that the northern states can do now if they were wary or careful?
So the answer is education and be prepared for like early detection and rapid response. So when these plants do start showing up at the border, they can jump on them. So one of the really nasty ones around here is Japanese stiltgrass. And I saw something coming from Wisconsin saying, "Oh, there's the first reports of Japanese stiltgrass have shown up in Wisconsin." Okay, this is your chance, guys. Either get on it now or surrender.
Thanks. Michael Laird, you're next. Unmute. Michael, you still on? If Michael isn't there or can't get on, Calvin K.
Yes, I had a question. Your PRISM is a Blue Ridge PRISM, but it only goes down just north of Rockbridge County. I have some interest in Rockbridge and Botetourt County. I wondered if you'd consider the PRISM moving a little farther south.
So the answer is we find that the 10 counties we have are as much as we can handle for most of what we do. On the other hand, if you send me an email, I may be able to put you in touch, if you're interested, with other people down in the Lexington area who every once in a while noodle with the notion of forming another PRISM, which is what we would like to see happen, so that people are dealing with it more locally rather than us trying to deal with everything all around the state. The other thing I should mention, by the way, is if there's anybody out there, even if they're not in Virginia, who would like to have either a presentation at this level or a more detailed one that gets into ID and control, we will entertain doing that even outside Virginia. So I've got one coming up next spring in South Carolina, for example. So we're open to all of that.
But I would like to just say that, sorry, I'd just like to say that you've been very efficient, it appears, in attracting outside funding, certainly more efficient than I've been able to be, or perhaps a new PRISM might be. For that reason, I think there are efficiencies of scale in this business.
Well, one of the things we believe is that if we could get 5 more PRISMs going in the state of Virginia, it would really make a huge difference, because what that would mean is that there would be, say, six PRISMs all coming to Richmond and talking to the state agencies from 6 different directions about the same problems, instead of there being one representative from one organization coming and hitting them up. So yeah, making it a group effort, I believe we could have much more impact.
Have you managed to, do you have any in the works or any people who are interested in starting others?
We have at least a couple who have expressed interest and who are noodling on the topic. Part of the problem, of course, is with any nonprofit, it requires strong leadership and people who are willing to put in a lot of time and do it as volunteers. I mean, I've been doing this with the Blue Ridge PRISM now for 6 years, and it's basically my unpaid retirement job. So it's and there's other people who spend a lot of time on it, and the trick is finding people who are willing to dedicate that much time and energy to the cause. But it can be done, and I tell you, all the major agencies in Richmond, they all know who we are.
Are you familiar with Eco Foresters? It's an organization in North Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina. But they are foresters, and they're very much interested in invasive species eradication.
Yeah, so, and I'm not familiar with them. And actually, if they do work in Virginia, yeah, we should potentially add them to our contractor list.
Okay.
So
I will send you an email.
Yeah, that'd be great.
is Michael Laird on by any chance? No. Okay, anyone else have a question? I don't see any more listed in chat.
I couldn't figure out how to get in the chat. This is
Well, then
Alan.
go ahead. Identify
um,
yourself, please.
Alan Clark from Vermont. And I just wanted to comment that in Vermont, working with NRCS is really pretty easy. I've had a grant for invasives control. I've had an advance for forest improvement. I do have a good forester who does my management plan, and that's also been a big help. But we have also something else called CISMA, C-I-S-M-A. It's what's Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. And I heard their talk as we haven't done management, but I heard a talk last night on responsible management of herbicides, and it was really great. And that was put on by CISMA in Vermont and should be on their website in, not too distant future to see that.
Yeah. So Alan, that's a great point, both with the NRCS as well as with the CISMA, because both the CISMA and our Blue Ridge PRISM are what's known generically as cooperative weed management areas, and there are several hundred of those in the United States. We were the first one formed in Virginia, and the CISMA you're referring to, I'm sure, is one of those that happens to be located in Vermont.
Yep. So it's just incredible, the resources out there. In fact, I guess when I first started worrying about managing my 108 acres, there were too many resources. And it's, you don't know where to turn first. And I do think your comments about either someplace in the state to get guidance is probably a really good way to start.
Yeah, and for those of you who'd be interested, I just put up another slide here. There's some really good resources out there. The one in the middle and the one on the right, the brown ones, these are both published by the U.S. Forest Service. They're two of my favorite books on this subject. And it's a curious thing because they don't print them anymore, but they still update them and they're available for free for download. And they're great books, pictures, instructions, a lot of good stuff. And I might also mention on this slide, the two books in the middle are done by Doug Tallamy, who's a professor at the University of Delaware. And he's done some of the best research on, what's the relationship between non-native plants and native wildlife, and how does that work, and what are the differences? And so he's documented, a lot of things around native trees and non-native trees, and what's the difference when it comes to how they support wildlife. Really, really good work. He's a great guy, and he's a great speaker too, by the way.
As you are. So there have been one or two questions about being able to have you speak and also being able to share this video. Nancy, once you post the video in a week or 2 or 3, we can share it beyond MIT people, right, Nancy?
Correct, yes, you can.
So everybody who's on this, understand that you will be able to take this wonderful video, including the Q&A, and share it widely. I think there are a growing number of outdoor schools during COVID. This might be a great thing to share with some of them. Ann Street has a question. Ann, unlink yourself or a comment.
Yeah, mine was not so much a question as it was a volunteer. I'm an invasive species volunteer for the Fairfax County Park Authority. Do you have contacts with the Park Authority? If not, I would be happy to help you get some contacts in Fairfax County with our invasive species people and some of the others that we deal with. Yes,
and so the answer is thank you very much for that offer. I think we are pretty well connected with them already. One of the other leaders of the PRISM, Jim Hurley, has done work with the Fairfax County Parks and Rec and done work in some of their parks. And so he's quite well connected up there. And I believe the Fairfax people, in conjunction with the Arlington County Parks and Rec folks, were some of the folks working with us back about 6 years ago, where we got the law changed to take out the widely disseminated language. They used Delegate Patrick Hope as the point person on that, and they're extremely helpful. Great people, and very, very knowledgeable, interested, and you know, really into the subject. It's a great group up there.
Thanks. We have a question from Bill Walker. Unmute yourself.
Hi, Bill Walker, South Carolina. Do you have any statistics or numbers about change, perhaps due to invasive plants so far?
So I'm not sure I understand the question, but given that you're my brother, you can just call me and ask me.
So he wrote in chat, do you have any numbers about how wildlife has been impacted so far due to invasive species? I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, so I may be able to dig up an article from Virginia Tech on this subject, but definitely these two books by Doug Tallamy get into that, particularly with regard to birds, if you will.
Great.
Okay. Any other questions? I think we've run through our chat list, and we could wrap up if no one else. This has been fascinating. So thank you, Rod. I've learned a lot. And I first walked through forests or trees as a 4-H'er when I was 7 years old on Eastern Long Island, and learned about sassafras and all the rest of them. I could identify them back then. Thank you to Cardinal and Gray, which has partnered with Class of 70, and to Rick Lufkin, who is president, and Nancy Mims, who has been the wonderful staffer who facilitated our Zoom session and rehearsed, and has been a wonderful partner for our class and for these sessions. Rod, you're terrific, and I wish you luck. Again, the video will be available in 1 to 3 or 4 weeks. Nancy, you have anything more specific? The last one, a little longer than we expected.
Yeah, right. Hopefully this one will come sooner. And I did just want to mention, it looked like, and I'm not sure if you called on them, but Alvin Clark and Malcolm Brown might have had questions. I don't know if we have a minute to get to them before you wrap up.
I didn't see them.
I don't know if they're still on the call. I don't know if, are you interested in?
We did
Either,
call anyone else who had questions.
They might be gone. Yeah, okay.
Okay. All right, so thank you all. I'm just thrilled to see how many different kinds of people are involved with forests. I learned something there too. MIT alumni and friends are a really interesting group. The conversation is always interesting, and the talks are fascinating. So thanks again, Rod. Good luck with your Blue Ridge Mountains. They're beautiful. I hope you can save them. And you've done amazing things with PRISM. I hope you can do more. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And do come to our January session, second Wednesday in January, 11 a.m. on air quality in California, wildfires, etc. We will send out something. Take care. Stay safe. Wear your masks.
Yes.
Rod, are you still on?
I'm here.
You might want to glance at the chat. Nancy's going to save it, but a lot of people identified themselves and explained where they are and what they're doing, which is why I think it's worth saving. But if you have a couple of minutes, you might run down. Some of them didn't ask questions or make comments, but they put comments in chat. So I didn't think you had a lot of time to look at chat while you were talking and answering questions.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
But if, assuming Nancy's able to save it, which she said she could.
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
If
Yeah.
anyone will want to contact you, will be able to ID them.
Yeah, if you can save it and email it to me, that'd be great.
Will do.
Thank you, thank you.
All
both.
right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming. Shall I
Nancy,
end the meeting for all?
Rod, I hope you get your internet back. I can't believe you. Thank goodness for going on early and discovering you had lost it.
Hey, you know, it'll come back as soon as the power company restores power to the mountain.
Is this the hurricane going up the East Coast or something?
Yeah, we probably got somewhere between 3 and 4 inches of rain. And whenever the power goes out, you know, both of the internet providers, and I don't know why, yeah, apparently have 3-hour battery backup. And so after 3 hours, their batteries die and all the service goes away.
So you haven't gotten a home generator yet?
Oh, we have power. We absolutely have power. That's not a
no
problem.
internet.
We just can't connect. So yeah, no, we're totally in business, but you know, we have no landline phone and no internet.
That's the, so you need a dish on top of your house or what?
We have a dish on top of the house, but you know, one of the internet service providers is Satellite, and even they have a 3-hour battery backup someplace in their system. And why that's the case, I don't understand.
They need you.
You know, I don't know. I mean, it makes no sense to me. So
You can write and tell them that.
yeah, well, you know, it's on my list.
Expert, as an expert. All right, well,
All right.
thank you again. This was
Thanks,
wonderful.
everyone. I'm going to end the meeting for all of us now. I'm going to end the meeting for all of us. So
Thank you.
farewell.